Is there a video game franchise that is more revered than The Legend of Zelda?
No, dude.
While it doesn't have the highest sales, it is the best reviewed franchise of all time.
Behold!
Not just with critics, but with fans as well. Over and over and over, they either meet or exceed our expectations for every game they release. And while the franchise isn't without its flaws, it's pretty close to perfect. Even when they said, we're going to change things up, we're not going to make a game like any other in the franchise, it still managed to succeed at creating a different kind of game that we could all love and appreciate as a masterpiece. And that game is Breath of the Wild. In fact, practically every time they make a transition to a new style of game, it is a success. The first Legend of Zelda game was the first video game to have a built-in save battery to save your progress on the cartridge itself. And then when the Super Nintendo came out with A Link to the Past, that changed everything. When the Legend of Zelda series was brought to the 3D world on the Nintendo 64, Ocarina of Time became one of the highest praised games of all time. There's almost nothing wrong with it, other than a few nitpicky complaints that you can get here and there about how you have to wait a lot. This is the formula that most Zelda fans are familiar with. Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, they all follow this same kind of format that Ocarina of Time invented for them, which also follows A Link to the Past, which also follows the original Legend of Zelda. For the most part, Zelda games have remained consistent as entries in the franchise. It wasn't until Breath of the Wild that a major leap like the Ocarina of Time leap was made again, nearly 20 years later. Breath of the Wild, despite being the success that it was, introducing millions of new fans to the franchise, didn't come without the reservations of older fans like, hey, this is not the games that we grew up loving. This is very different than the format that we are used to, which is fine. Not every game has to be a remake of Ocarina of Time, and not every 2D game has to be a remake of A Link to the Past. That said, as a franchise, it does have kind of a responsibility to feel familiar to players.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Which is what the attempt was made in Tears of the Kingdom with bringing back thematic dungeons. Unfortunately, those dungeons fall short in every conceivable way. I would go so far as to say that they are the worst dungeons in the entire franchise. And they're one of the many flaws that are present in Tears of the Kingdom. But I will get to that later. I'll discuss the dungeons and problems that I have with them in another video, probably this month. But today, I want to talk about how I would make the perfect Zelda game. One that could take the 2D games, the 3D games, and the open air games, mash them all together in a satisfying way to make all Zelda fans happy. A monumental task, but these are my ideas. Trust me guys, I'm an expert on Zelda. I made Zelda memes that I still see today being posted around the internet. Back from my days of being an admin on the Legend of Zelda memes Facebook page.
I know what I'm talking about.
The first thing I would do to make a perfect Zelda game is something that Tears of the Kingdom failed to do. I want an original world map. A Hyrule or different location that we've never seen before. The way that Ocarina of Time's Hyrule is different than Wind Waker's or Tears of the Kingdom or even Link to the Past. They're all different Hyrules. The perfect Zelda game needs to have a different Hyrule or different land to explore. It could be like Termina, it could be like Link's Awakening. Anything like that. I have an entire video about how Tears of the Kingdom made me upset because the world map was the same as Breath of the Wild's. I don't want that again. And one thing I can't stress enough, an active story would be greatly appreciated in a future Zelda title. I don't want to get rid of the open air format. I actually like being able to do the story out of order the way that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom allow us to do. However, so far they have not been able to tell a compelling story in this way. Breath of the Wild's was good in the present tense. Tears of the Kingdom's story was only good in the past. So what we're looking for is a story that can be told out of order, but keeps the players engaged for the sake of the story itself. The open air world is fine. Open air storytelling is struggling. Most Zelda games have at least a few interactions with an antagonist before the final confrontation. Breath of the Wild only had the Blights, and Tears of the Kingdom only had the opening scene.
flashbacks don't count.
Zelda games as a format do well with idle antagonists that don't really interact with the player throughout the game. Most of the best games in the franchise have that. But Breath of the Wild's idle antagonist had a lack of depth to it. We don't even know where it actually came from. And Tears of the Kingdom didn't expand on that at all. And the fact that the story in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are completely optional, being told through optional flashbacks. It's all optional. And I'm here to say some parts of a story shouldn't be optional.
And having the king tell you that you need to save the day probably isn't the only required story that you should have.
So in the next Zelda game, it should have a story that can be told in any order with an idle antagonist that makes problems for you as you make your way through. It should also have a few more important story beats that can't be ignored before getting to the final plot. I know that speedrunners will be upset with this. I don't really care, because they're not in it for the story anyways. And they'll just find different ways to break the game getting to the end faster with or without the story beats. They always do. So yeah, just make a story that isn't good for speedrunning, but it's great for everyone else, because the vast majority of the community is not made up of speedrunners. Third point. You know what's been missing from Zelda games in the past 2 installments? Items. I want my hookshot back. I know that the runes function as items just in the same way that old Zelda games had them. The only problem I have with that is that in older Zelda games, Link felt more like Batman, just a regular guy using all the gadgets that he could find to make the best of the situation that he had. Sometimes he did have magical abilities sprinkled in there, but for the most part, he was on his own. The runes feel more or less attached to Link, especially in Tears of the Kingdom, where it's actually part of his physical arm. And again, it goes in line with that whole, it feels more like Link is a magical being rather than a Batman-like one. Number 4, a perfect Zelda game should keep the open air format. I love being able to explore the entire world out of order, in whatever way I choose, and how the people in the world seem to interact with me in that way. What I think they need to add to that, though, are consequences for your actions throughout the story and throughout the world. I'm not saying put a morality system in Zelda. Link is always a good guy, no matter what. But making it so that some of your actions do have consequences could make the story feel more alive. Another point is, I need true dungeons back. A Zelda game is nothing without dungeons. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom actually have more dungeons than any other Zelda game. In fact, I think Breath of the Wild alone has more dungeons than all the other Zelda games put together. The problem is that they're all tiny, very tiny dungeons. The shrines are basically just mini dungeons, and there's nothing wrong with that. I love having 120 shrines. The problem is that when you get to the major dungeons, the Divine Beasts, they can be done in 20 minutes if you know how to do them. They can be done in half an hour if you don't. And Tears of the Kingdom tried to fix that, but it made them even easier to get through. I don't know why the Zelda team seems to be struggling to make major dungeons again. They used to be masters of that craft. Who else remembers the Ancient Cistern or even Stone Tower Temple? One of the frustrating things is that it feels like you can just break your way through a dungeon now. It used to be, you see a puzzle, you solve that puzzle, you get through. In Tears of the Kingdom, it's, what can I do to exploit the weaknesses that I see in this puzzle, so that I don't have to do the whole thing. They took a step in the right direction in Tears of the Kingdom, making their dungeons thematic, but ultimately they were disappointing. Again, I'm going to get to that in another video. But the perfect Zelda game would have dungeons like they had before Breath of the Wild. In fact, the dungeon format that I prefer is Majora's Mask. Have you ever noticed that in Majora's Mask, the only item that you get from each dungeon is a different kind of arrow? But other than that, you just use all the tools, masks, whatever you have to get through those dungeons, and they're extremely creative. You could take that and put it in the next Zelda game flawlessly. You just have to make it so that you can't break your way through a dungeon. The same way they put all that effort into making it so that you can't just break your way through most shrines. Of course, speedrunners, they're the outlier here, so let's not base our standards on what they're doing. I got real dungeons. I want real dungeons. I want the shrines, but I want to get lost in a beautiful mine with lava and Goron history and lore built all through it. And yeah, that's how I'd fix the dungeons. One of the other problems that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom tend to have is how many resources it takes to upgrade your armor. Breath of the Wild was mostly fine. It does take hours to harvest a lot of the resources that you need to upgrade the best armor in the game, but with how long a lot of people play these games, finding those resources kind of just comes naturally over time. Tears of the Kingdom made the issue a lot worse. It was impossibly difficult to get enough resources to upgrade your armor sets. I'd never used the duplication glitch, but I wanted to, just for the sake of not having to wait on a dragon's back for hours just to get the exact amount that I need throughout the entire game to upgrade all the armor sets that I'm going to get. Hours just standing on a dragon's back. I left it on while I was just working. So if you're going to have an upgrade system, don't make it take hours and hours of grinding just to upgrade it one level. Make the resources that you need to upgrade these items abundant to the point that you don't have to spend hours searching for them. And to add insult to injury in Tears of the Kingdom, they made it so that every upgrade costs rupees. So not only are you spending your resources on actually upgrading the armor, which some of these resources cost hundreds of rupees on their own, you also have to spend hundreds of rupees. I still remember how many rupees it takes to get the magic armor in Twilight Princess, and then for it to take your rupees as the cost of using it. Oh, but even that seemed way cheaper than whatever was going on in Tears of the Kingdom. So the perfect Zelda game has an upgrade system that doesn't take hours upon hours upon hours of collecting. It would be more akin to Skyward Swords. That should be your model on how to upgrade your items, and how much it should cost, and how much time it should take to do so. If it's more than that, you're doing it wrong. Another thing, the next Zelda game is going to be huge. We all know that. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom set the standard so high that the next game has to be as big, if not bigger than they are. And that means more and more and more to explore. But I never, for the rest of my life, want to see an achievement for something monumental be a golden pile of poo. In fact, Tears of the Kingdom had 2 versions of this. If you get all of the light roots in the depths, you get a certificate. You don't even get like a special item, just a certificate saying congratulations, dude. In the past Zelda games, you had real rewards for doing everything. Let's go all the way back to A Link to the Past. When you collect everything, look at your Link. He is goated with the sauce. He's got magic armor, he's got an upgraded sword, he's got silver arrows. You do everything, and that makes your Link almost unstoppable. He is so strong. In Breath of the Wild, you get a piece of poo. I mean, that's better than some Zelda games where your reward is the reward itself. In Ocarina of Time, if you collect all of the heart pieces, you have all of the heart pieces. In Majora's Mask, look at it that way. If you get all of the masks in Majora's Mask, which none of them are necessary or required, what do you get? You get the game-busting Fierce Deities mask. Something that is so worth collecting every other mask to get because it makes the boss fights trivial. Just a flick of your wrist basically is all it takes to destroy the bosses from then on, including the final boss. And again, it's optional. You don't have to go that way, but the incentive to do so is worth it. And Breath of the Wild did have the form of that. With the outfit of the Wild, you felt like Link again. It was a true reward for doing all of the shrine quests, and upgrading all of it made it the best armor set in the game. In Tears of the Kingdom, you get an armor set that takes, again, hours upon hours upon hours to upgrade it to its fullest point. So, what it should be like when you do a monumental task is give the player something game-breaking. They don't need it to beat the game. They're already good enough to do so. Give them something game-breaking just for the fun of it. Give them another Fierce Deities mask. If I collect every single Korok thing, but instead of a Fierce Deity, make me like a giant tree monster. I don't know. Make it something that makes it worth my while in-game to do this. But worth my while in a way that I'm already good enough to beat the game. This is just going to make it easier. And the last thing I really want, I want the Triforce to be part of the story again. The Triforce was a key part of every Zelda story except for Majora's Mask and Link's Awakening all the way up until Twilight Princess. And then it was brought back in Skyward Sword as again an integral plot point. For some reason, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom like to act like the Triforce doesn't even exist anymore. I know it's basically the Dragon Balls, you collect all 3 pieces and then you get to make a wish, but it was such a good lore piece of Zelda. It's just part of the story. You know, Link has the Triforce of Courage. That's what makes him courageous. Zelda has the Triforce of Wisdom, which makes her have wisdom. And so on with Ganondorf and the Triforce of Power. The Triforce not being relevant to these 3 characters takes away from that linked by destiny part of the story. They are the 3 pieces of the Triforce that are united by this destiny, and Tears of the Kingdom didn't even bring that up once. So I need to see the Triforce be an active part of the story. I don't have to collect all the pieces, even if it's just mentioned by name on how important it is. To me, it doesn't feel quite like a Zelda game unless the Triforce is part of it. It's the symbol of the entire series, and it's been absent in the past 2 games. So to paint this picture, the perfect Zelda game to me looks like this: an open-air world where Link can explore it at his leisure, in any way that he wants to, in any order that he wants to. Some things may be blocked behind getting a certain item, but getting said item is not blocked by anything. You wouldn't need the bow and arrow to get the hookshot, and you wouldn't need the hookshot to get the bombs. Those things should just come naturally with the territory. Maybe some special items that don't need to be used in any of the other dungeons are found in those dungeons, kind of like in Tears of the Kingdom with the champion's abilities, but they should be more useful outside of the dungeon than they are. It also has an idle antagonist that does show up from time to time in the story to make life harder for the hero. As you explore this world, you get more and more powerful, just like in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but when you reach the pinnacle of your power, you are rewarded with an even greater power that you don't even need, but it's fun to have. And all the while, doing the adventure tells you a story, instead of having to pick up the pieces of the story using flashbacks. And while you're exploring this world, you come across dungeons, but not dungeons like in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, real Zelda dungeons. Ones that make you use every bit of thinking that you have to get to the next room, to unlock that door, to get that key, to get that special item, to overcome the boss therein, and find a piece of the treasure that you needed in order to fix the world's problems, or at least make your task of doing so a little bit easier. And while you may be able to ignore the dungeons and other side quests in order to get to the final boss, we need a story that does have important plot points that can't be skipped, because otherwise the story is too shallow. And all the while you collect resources, you don't have to grind for hours upon hours just to upgrade a piece of armor that you'll only wear a couple times throughout the game. And there it is. That is my perfect Zelda game. That's all I have for you today. Look forward to my next video where I'm going to be discussing my top choices for 2D LEGO sets that I feel like they should make after the Great Deku Tree set. And please remember to like, subscribe, and comment on this video to boost that algorithm, get these takes out there. Until next time.